some folks are saying, 70% of employers are actually deploying social media checks as part of their frontline checks, as part of their pre-employment checks. Glassdoor, for example, states that 91% of UK employers are using social media checks. So we're seeing far more formal regulated sectors using this particular check. And we're seeing also that organizations outside of the regulated arena are looking at a sort of formal structured process around a social media check. So yes, Google searches are still being undertaken by managers in advance of an interview. That's a given. But formal screening is most definitely more consistent and fair and auditable. So what is an organization looking for in undertaking a social media check? They're looking for potential risks to themselves, their customers, their colleagues. And it's all about looking at context. That's hugely important. It's not about looking at lifestyle choices or personal opinions. But it's very much a rising check in the background screening world. And what we're looking for essentially in undertaking those checks as screening practitioners is evidence of illegal, discriminatory or abusive behavior which conflict with professional standards. So that's it in a nutshell. That's what employers are actually looking for. And it's on the rise. What this check is all about, it's a risk assessment, essentially. The sort of red flags that are being raised are items such as hate speech, discrimination, antisocial behavior, harassment. Those are the sort of red flags. And there are keywords that are used as part of the social media check, which would then identify whether that behavior was a red flag for an employer. They're looking for threats of violence or any form of criminality that's perhaps shown on an online presence, and also serious breaches of confidentiality. If you're talking about your previous employer, for example, in derogatory terms, or product that the employer had, that would be seen as a breach of confidentiality, and that's clearly not a behaviour that organisations wish to have in their business. Content that directly conflicts with the values of the employer is also really, really critical. So values-driven organizations will seek individuals who share the same values or similar values, and also are a really good cultural fit for that organization. So if an individual is showing the opposite of that online, that would be a cause of concern for that particular organization, obviously. So they're looking more for patterns of behavior rather than isolated instances. Is this a recurring, repeated dialogue that we're seeing online? And is this something to be concerned about as a future employer when legitimate due diligence becomes unfair judgment? I think it's when context isn't taken into account, when context is ignored. I think that's hugely dangerous. You've got to look at everything contextually. And when screening lacks transparency or consistency, I think that is a worry as well. Let's make people absolutely aware. I think the check needs to be relevant to the role, always has been in the development of background screening practices. The scope of checks is always relevant to the role. So that is crucially important. And I think when decisions are made on protected characteristics, and if you're looking at protected characteristics such as race, sex, religion, all of those items, that is absolutely a no-no. So we've got to have a fair playing ground here, and we've got to take into account all those points in order to make this a fair process. But context, I think, above everything is hugely important. You can have a comment that, taken out of context, can seem alarming, yet actually if one were to look at the full scope of all the posts, is actually a fair response to a subject matter. So I think context is key for me. I think it all starts with employers being given the tools, if they are working with a social media checking company, the employer being given the tools in order to inform the candidates or applicants well in advance of the process. It's absolutely critical that everything is transparent, that the individual being screened knows what the process is, where data is drawn from or looked at, so that they feel comfortable that they are still in control, but that this check is necessary for them to be engaged with that particular organization. So I think it's all about the responsibility of the background screening industry to educate the employers to educate the individuals. That said, if we can speed up and give access to the background checking industry to help educate students, and certainly we're working with organizations such as JISC and Prospects to do that, that will be essential, because therein we're helping the employer right at the start to educate young people who will go through the process informed before they reach the employment stage. So it won't come as a surprise. So yes, employers need to do a lot to inform their candidates, but it's also incumbent upon our industry to support that. Just as, it's incumbent upon our industry to support credit checks, the education around credit checks. What does it mean if you've got a CCJ? How can you satisfy that particular county court judgment? All those pieces of information that take away the angst in a process and enable a fair chance for all individuals going through that process. AI was a massive topic at the PBSA's conference in London this year, the way that it is now very, very visible in our industry. And it's interesting that clients are asking what part of the process is AI driven. They're far more comfortable if some of the back end processes within a screening organization are AI driven, to push for efficiency, speed, etc., to gather large volumes of information and to digest that. But they're not so keen on the front end piece, and that's where human judgment is absolutely critical in this process. So if AI can work comfortably with human judgment and human intervention, then I think we've got a really good product. AI cannot be allowed to take over that human judgment thing, nor do I think it will be allowed. I mean, we've got a lawsuit at the moment in the States with regards to the way that AI has created some bias in the pre-screening of candidates' CVs. And that's a really interesting case, because I think that will define a lot of the rules going forward about how far AI can go in the whole onboarding process. So yes, AI has a role in gathering data, large volumes of data, and helping humans digest that, but the judgment needs to be human judgment so that we can give some real context to the results that were offered. I think when they are looking at sort of social media checks, they need to make sure that there is a consistency of decision making. Absolutely. They need to make sure there are no biases that have crept into the process at all. And they need to make sure that there are no discrimination risks whatsoever in a process. And it's an interesting one that, in the past, you would have background checking being undertaken on full-time employees, for example, and then temp folks and contractors also have background checking, but maybe at that particular time that their background checking scope was of a different scope to the core employees, and therefore you probably got some bias in. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think you're seeing far more unilateral scope being applied to all those populations, or it should be, to avoid that any type of discrimination entering the process. So I think the employer needs to be aware clearly of GDPR and data privacy and all those obligations which are absolutely critical. And if they do engage with a professional background screening organization or social media checking business, they will find that in bag loads. They will find all the right protocols, all the right frameworks, all the right guidance, all the right risk matrices, all the right keywords, all fully defined and stress tested to make sure that none of those biases have got into the process, that it's fair. And as an employer, you can then select what risks are unacceptable to your business based on the values that your business has, and what what kind of a profile you want for your business. So that is all preordained within the background screening matrix, and that eliminates bias from getting into the process. I think that's really, really critical. But I think, do it yourself can be a bit of a dangerous game, if I'm honest with you. And I wouldn't recommend it. I've seen the industry evolve over the last 15 years, and the products that they have now have been developed to make sure that employers are kept safe and that individuals' privacies aren't just not infiltrated in a way that the individual would not want them to be. So that's really, really important that they consider working with an organization that has experience in this, that has seen a multitude of scenarios, and can give the employer advice when they get a result that they don't know what to do with. That is critical. So surround yourself with experts. So if we look at digital wallets, which have been talked about for decades, to be fair, and many have attempted it, and many are working on digital wallets at the moment. The government is showing interested in digital identity wallets, all of that good stuff. Why do we need digital wallets? Or why is there an interest in it? It's for speed of engagement, especially in the gig economy. So one individual can move to a job without having to time and time again produce their documents. That is the main reason: speed of engagement, and also from a candidate or applicant experience, creating a positive experience where an individual has sovereignty over their data and is able to provide that data that is assured, that has been tested, that the employer trusts as being robust data. The issue to hand today has been that there's been no one organization where it's been assured, it's been trusted, it's been verified, etc. And I think it's a great ambition to have. And, if I had my magic ball here and I look to the future, I think that will probably be the future. But at the moment, what background screening organizations are trying to do, they're trying to be smarter in the way that data is being used. They're trying to be faster in the way that the processes work so that there is a frictionless entry for individuals. But I think, it would be in the future potentially a good thing to have a data wallet, but that has been tried many, many times before. And yeah, I mean, I think that it is the future, but not right now.